Welcome to the Coffee Break Show. Today we are going to rock your world. But first, you got to listen to the music. I'll see you guys in a second. Welcome. You're on the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life channel. I am Vickie Helm. This is a Coffee Break Show. And today we are with Jason Lauritsen. And I want to tell you something. Jason is in the house and we are going to have such a powerful conversation. And everybody wants to know how we can be better, how we can have high performance, how we can have better relationships and connection with people as we work and play and live together. Today, Jason, welcome to the Coffee Break Show. We are going to be hanging out with him and we're going to pick his brain. We're going to have so much fun asking questions and being with him. If you're on the Coffee Break Show right now, I see you guys starting to pop on. Do me a favor, put your name down below and become part of the conversation. Now, first off, I want to say, Jason, nice to have you with us today. I'm super excited.
I am delighted to be here, Vickie.
That's so cool. I see you guys popping on. Thanks. Now, I want to let you know that we did not get together and say, let's wear clothes that are matching and definably matching. It's just brilliance at work here. So, Jason, I'm going to dig right in and we're just going to go for it right now. I want to know what your definition of high performance is. And not just the individual, but let's say you're an entrepreneur and you have employees or people that work with. How do we achieve high performance, and what exactly is it?
Wow. So that's a giant question, but I'll start
It
with
is.
defining high performance. And I think very simply, the way that I think about it, and to be fair, I should put a lens on this, right? My domain of expertise is the workplace. So I've committed my life to sort of unsucking the work experience for people, making it sort of an experience that, can be nourishing and provide a lift people up, right? That you should
We
get as
need that
much
now.
from work as you give to work, right? As an employee, and it can be that way. So in the context of workplace, what I would say is high performance is um, coming as close as possible to recognizing your potential. And so it's that simple, right? And I think that as leaders, as managers, that's really what we're after. Is I just want you to show up and be able to be as close to the best you can give me today as you can. That's
And
straightforward.
that's such an important thing. And we're talking about the Great Resignation. You guys, I see you popping on. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Happy Wednesday, everybody. And look who is in the house. Amber Mirza. Nice to see you. I'm hugging you virtually, my friend. Nice to see you on. Thank you. Let's see. Had literally 2 minutes before my call, so thought I'd jump in and say, hey, thank you for being here on the live with us. I appreciate it so much. And so I see my better half is on. Thank you for jumping on, everybody. Glad to see you here. So what I want to be able to talk about with you as we thank you. I see that hugging me right back. You go, girl. So what happens when we begin to look at from the standpoint of going to work? We have the biggest resignation of people who are unhappy with the quality maybe of their workplaces and the quality of how they're being treated, or they're thinking, why should I even be here or deal with some of the things we deal with at work? And maybe now when you're an employer, perhaps you're hiring people who already feel resentful about the workplace and having to work through and set some of those parameters up. What do people do to create valuable, thriving workplaces? I mean, I know a lot of it's culture, but just individually.
Yeah. Well, so in order to answer that question, I need to back up a sec to
Mm-hmm.
explain. So one of the biggest insights of my career came, I mean, I've been kind of doing the work of employee engagement, trying to understand employee engagement, trying to understand management and why management always felt so unnatural and all of that for 20 plus years. And it took me years and years to arrive at a place where the time, or sort of the moment in time that it happened, is I after a 10-year career in HR leadership, executive leadership inside the organization, and then some consulting, I ended up doing, for 3 years, I got to work for an organization called Quantum Workplace, and I ran the best places to work team there. And so Quantum is a tech company. They have, one of the tools they have is an employee survey. And the team that I led was a team that basically helped use this employee survey to kind of be the research engine behind all these best places to work programs you see across the US and beyond. And so we collected like hundreds of thousands of employee data or surveys and data points every year, and then we do analysis on it. And one of the things that at the end of each year we do sort of a summary, like what are the big drivers or trends or whatever. And I remember when I was there, after my second or third year of we were doing this report, I was looking at this report and realizing, like, we would always sort of have these top 10 drivers, like the top 10 drivers of engagement and satisfaction in the workplace right now. And at the top of that list, every single year, not the very top, but sort of on this list, were some things like, I need to feel valued, I want to feel cared for, trust, right? Trusting the people I work with and being trusted, being cared for, appreciated, all of these things. And what hit me was, when you look at those things, when you pull them out of the context of it being a workplace survey, and you look at just those things, it doesn't sound much like work, right? It sounds, if I say care, trust, appreciation, all of those things, what does that sound like? It sounds like a relationship. That's what it sounds like. And so the insight for me was, employees experience work as a relationship.
Interesting.
And if you think about, once you have that insight and you go, oh, well, obviously, like, and so employees are showing up to work every day wanting to be in a healthy, positive relationship. And it's a really important relationship because it's where I spend all my time, and it's where I get my identity, and it's where I get my self-esteem and all this stuff. Well, the problem fundamentally has been that employees are showing up to work wanting to feel like they're in this great relationship. And what's the workplace telling you? What have you done for me lately?
That's right.
They treat it like
completely.
A contract, right? It's a contract to be enforced. That doesn't work. And so what has happened, the Great Resignation, I think, is a comeuppance, right? This has been an issue for, we have data that shows for 30 years it hasn't been working.
That's right.
Hasn't been working.
That's right.
And all of a sudden now, though, it got really bad. When people, when the pandemic showed up, it really revealed how bad it was. And people were like, you know what? I've been in this dysfunctional relationship with you for decades, for years. I've had enough. I'm stepping out. And some people are just being done for a while. Some people are going to find it. And so the underlying, getting to your question, what do we do? The key is, we have to stop treating work like a contract to be enforced. And we have to start realizing we've got to treat it like a relationship. Employees have to feel like they're in a healthy relationship. And so that is the path.
And that's such an interesting thing, because I don't think we can just get to healthy relationships. Mr. Ambassador, he says, golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. People are feeling, with all that has happened over the past 2 years, they're not being treated well by corporations. Here's the thing, though. I want to ask you this, because I know for me, I'm a CEO. I have companies. I feel very strongly about my leadership position in there. But what I find for me is, when employees are proud of what they do, not necessarily the task, because maybe you're part of the, payroll department or whatever, but that when they're proud of what you do as a leader, as a company, and how you act out in the world, how you present yourself out in the world, there is a tendency for them to be proud of where they work, and their productivity goes up. And I want to know that key player for you. What do you think about that? Because I think about this all the time. People who work for Oprah, probably, or Richard Branson, but Oprah specifically, that's kind of a CEO leadership position where what she does in the world is so meaningful that what you do inside to make that thing happen in the world at a high level creates productivity. What do you think about those things? How is it that leadership's actions, not just how they speak to someone,
Mhm.
but the actions that they have out there, like people at Apple may have a lot of pride in what they do, under Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I'm going to parse that out a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is absolutely true that the culture of an organization flows from the executive leadership, the
Mm-hmm.
CEO. Like that for sure is the case. Like oftentimes when you describe the culture, especially as companies are growing and you have, like yourself, where you have like a founder or CEO that's growing the
Mm-hmm.
business, the culture, if you describe the culture, is often a reflection of that CEO's style, personality, beliefs, whatever. And so those two things are often inseparable. And so I think you're absolutely right that there is that piece of it. And it certainly helps. If you have an inspirational CEO
Mm-hmm.
that gives you something to believe in, that you can be proud of, that's terrific. However, I would say it can give you purpose and meaning in your work. But if the person that is directly responsible for your day-to-day work
At manager.
doesn't value you, doesn't see you, doesn't care, doesn't interact
Yeah.
with you, that can interrupt everything. I can feel really proud. And I mean, I know people, I guarantee you there are people in Oprah's organization that hate going to work every day.
Yeah. I
They
imagine
love,
there is probably something there.
they probably love
Yeah.
they're proud of being part of the Oprah organization, and that maybe keeps them going because they like having that business card, right? It feels meaningful. But boy, I hate my manager. And at the end of the day, there comes a point where there's a breaking point. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to do this anymore. And so what I would say is that the leadership critically important, but the manager has like superpowers because the manager can do one of two things. The manager can amplify what is happening,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
I can amplify the Oprah, I can be the Oprah, I
Yep.
can whatever. But alternatively, a manager within a bad organization, and I lived this several times, a manager inside a bad organization can also interrupt the cycle, right? If I've got,
Yes, I agree with that.
right,
That's
I
such
can
a
create
strong point.
a great organ. I spent I when I reflect on management, I remember at the time as a manager, I spent about half of my time, it felt like, trying to create a bubble around my team, right? I wanted them to have a great experience and feel like they were a part of a great organization. And broadly, maybe we weren't, but I really tried to protect them from all the nonsense. And a manager can do that. You can make people feel
Mm-hmm.
great, even in a bad
That's true.
organization, even when there's bad processes and you're being asked to do stupid things, you can still show up for your people and make them feel great about what they do every day.
That's true. And that's so interesting because I think that becomes a personal choice as a manager. To me, I have experienced the bad apple manager in a great organization.
Mm,
And that is the first place I look because I think uh, people that come in that want to give you their time and there's a relationship dynamic happening, if your management team is the intermediary between that relationship and they suck, they need to be out. And it's not that they suck, they could be great at their job, but their attitude sucks.
mm,
And the way they treat people sucks. And that is some of the most horrible stuff to work in. And I think there's got to be a shifting in that too from, what's our bottom line? Are we making the numbers? Are we closing as many? Are you producing this or et cetera? To having an opening into building relationships with your
mhm,
employees. So because they're people. And Mr. Ambassador pops on and says, employees should be treated like your customers. If you're willing to bend over backwards for your clients, why wouldn't you do that for your employees? Interesting question. Interesting question. And I would like to hear more about your thoughts on this particular statement. Why wouldn't you do that for your employees? Is it a different relationship between customers and employees? And if so, what do you think of creating? What are maybe three things that we can do to create deeper relationships with employees?
So I'm going to take that even farther. I would say that I think if you're not treating your employees at least as well as your customers, that's a failure. That's fix that. But I would say that it goes even farther than that. One of the things that, and this starts your answer to your question, and it's sort of a broad tool, but one of the techniques that I like to teach managers and leaders is to use something I call the relationship test.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship test is this. It's, at work when we think about, so as a manager, I'm thinking about some task or something I have to do. I have to do, maybe provide some feedback to a person, or I have to
Mm-hmm.
do a
Mm-hmm.
performance evaluation or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Before I step into that conversation with that employee, this is sort of a thought experiment, if you will. It's a way to sort of test yourself out. What I encourage the manager and leader to do is I want you to think, if the person on the other end of this interaction, let's say, was your best friend, right? Someone that
Mm.
you care deeply about, that you have a great relationship with, you care about the relationship, you would never do anything to harm that. If your best friend was on the other side of this interaction you're about to have, how would you approach it? And would the way you approach it be different than the way that you would probably have by default approached it with your employee? And then the question is, well, if I wouldn't treat my best friend in the way that I'm about to treat that employee, then why is it okay to treat that employee that way? And
Love
and
these
it's just a
questions.
way. So it takes. I think it's beyond the question. It's beyond the customer. I mean, yes, you should treat them at least as well as your customers, but I think you should treat them as well as you treat the most important people in your life. Right? Respect,
Mm-hmm.
dignity, trust, appreciation, care, love, all the things. When you start to put that lens on it, right? Put someone you care deeply about on
Yes.
the other end of
Yes.
that, and then think about, how would I handle that? And chances are, that if you can get in the mental space of doing that regularly, it's a great checkpoint, and you'll be shocked by how often you'd be like, well, yeah, I would definitely approach that differently. And so that's one thing that I would say is an easy place to check yourself. Um, you asked for how else can we build relationships, and
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing that I would offer is a lesson that sort of drove home for me by my daughter. My daughter is 14 now, but when she was 7 years old, I was working on, I don't even remember, I was working on a presentation, or I was working on something I was writing up. And she was walking through literally just walking through the room one day. And I said, I'm like, Bailey, said, how do you know if someone loves you? And she stopped for a second, and she thought, and she said, well, she said, they give me lots of hugs and kisses. And this is not my recommendation for workplace. Let's be very clear. Don't write that down. Don't say, I heard this guy say, like, bring it in, people. I'm a hugger, but let's be real. Let's be careful. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's not it. It was the second thing she said that really floored me. And it was this. She said, they spend time with me. It was that straightforward. At 7 years old, a 7-year old has the clarity to understand that the most precious commodity that we have
It's
is
time.
time. And
Yep.
we all have the same amount of time. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to see what somebody cares about and what's important to someone, look at how they spend their time. And so if you want to build a relationship with your people, if you're a manager and a leader and you want to foster relationships, you have to make time to be with them. And so as a manager, that means one-on-one meetings, that
Mm-hmm.
regularly, it's checking in, it's reaching out, it's making the time for conversations, it's listening. It's when you are with them that you are with them fully, that you are not distracted. You put your phone away, you put your everything away, and you are there for no other reason than to be with them, to give them the gift of your attention and your time. That is the most powerful way to amplify and accelerate a relationship that there is just Put in the time. There's no shortcut. There is no workaround. There's no hack.
So let me ask you, because I know that we are living in the time of the Great Resignation, and I do not believe that people are married anymore to a job title. I believe they're married more to the experience they're having inside a company, and maybe the culture of that company, whether it's a service-based company or manufacturing, or the culture in there. How does that play on creating the relationship, and how can you set the culture of something? What can we do as leaders, managers, or executives, or C-suite people to create the kind of environments where people thrive in them and they want to give you their best work?
Well, there's a few different things that are important in it. I think in the process of the challenge we have with culture, that I've seen over and over throughout my career, and it continues to happen today, and I'm still mystified that I keep running into the same thing over and over again, is people, especially now with distributed workforces and people working from home, one of the top concerns for executives and managers is, how do we maintain our culture? And the follow-up question is, well, what is your culture?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Especially now, if
what culture
everybody's
are you
working at
trying to
home.
maintain?
Yeah.
And you know what? Most of the time it's like, well, it's and it's like, and there's no specific articulation of it. And they have trouble pinning down and defining what it is or exactly. And so it's like, I mean, this is the thing. Most cultures and most organizations, I would say, are accidental. There is a culture at every organization, and that culture is what people do when you're not watching them, right? That's that's the
Yes,
most
that's right.
fundamental thing
Yep.
about culture. And so we thought we were managing culture back when we were all together in the office. We could see people. So we thought we understood what the culture was because we could see what people were doing. The problem is there was this other culture that defines, when you're not seeing them, what are they doing? And now when people are at home, it terrifies leaders. It's like, well, what? I never see them. So how am I supposed to know? It's like, well, the way that you get there, first off, is you have to manage it. You have to articulate it. You have to dictate what kind of culture you are about. If you don't have your culture written down crystal clearly so that you understand it, you understand how it impacts your management and leadership and communication and all of that, your employees can talk about, here's what our culture is. And if I walk around your organization and ask an employee what the culture is, they say the same thing that the executive does, then you're not managing your culture. And so you're worrying about, like, well, how do we maintain our culture? It's like, well, how do you maintain a cloud?
Yeah.
Right? You try to grab on,
Yeah.
well, I don't know what you're talking about. You didn't have a culture before you were managing. What are you doing? And so you have to get there. Now, how do you get to that? The best way to get to that is to co-create that with your employees. Like, it used to drive me insane when I'd sit in executive meetings with my peers, when I was an HR executive, and I'd sit in this room with all of these high paid, high title, smart people, and they're wondering, like, well, what could we do, about this with employees, or what could we do? I wonder what they're thinking about this or whatever. And I'm like, hey, they're right over there. Let's go ask them. Let's go talk to them. Like, if you want to know
Yeah.
how to make a great culture for your people, I don't know. How about we go ask them? And then once they tell us, build that for them. It's really pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not
I
easy
love
work,
that.
but it's like, it's not complicated. It's kind of like, how would you know? How do you, it's sort of like asking the question is like, well, I want to maintain a healthy relationship with my wife. And so then I'm going to go talk to a billion other people and experts about,
Instead of your wife.
like, go talk to your wife.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty straightforward.
I like that. I love the simplicity of the things you brought. Some Facebook user, as an employer, I think it's not culture as much it is how do we keep our values aligned so we can move as a community? Boom. I know who this is
Agreed.
too. Wendy, this is beautiful. Thank you. How do we keep our values aligned so we can move as a community? It's interesting because when you even, I don't even care if we hire you out and you're like a VA for us that works for yourself, etc. We kind of have fundamental mottos, and that our mottos are like, we achieve success together, no burden is too heavy if everyone lives, and we're gonna have fun here. And there's like this attitude that I look for in people when I hire them as well. And one of them is that alignment of values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we have people that are aligned in values and in mindset, I
Yep.
think that also achieves a culture for us as well. And I don't think this great resignation is going to be like overnight, because one of the fundamental things is, if you're in a bad relationship and you suddenly are the one who's being abused in the bad relationship,
Yep.
and the person who is the abuser doesn't even know they're abusing, and suddenly they're like, wait, honey, you, me, wait, let's stay, we can work this out. It's not necessarily the employee that has to change, it's the abuser that has to change. And I
Yep.
know a lot of people are thinking, well, I'm a great manager, I'm not an abuser. But I believe that if you're not really aware or mindful of what you're doing, just based on how many decades we have been in this cycle,
Mm-hmm.
you can naturally just kind of fall into there, and your productivity goes down. And when your productivity goes down, you think instead of changing something you're doing as a person, you need to come down harder on them or make them do more or do something, because your productivity isn't where it is. And to those managers in the middle, let's see. When the workforce fractures, people become less altruistic and more self focused. That's right. That's it right there. When the workforce fractures, people become less altruistic and more self focused. But when you're trying to, as a manager, the way I see it is, here's the middleman is always the manager, and you have everything that the board of directors or your upper management has already assigned you to achieve. Your job depends on achieving it. And if your unwillingness happens because productivity is down or attitude is down, your butt is now on the line. And being able to use the skills, it's like this skill set that people have to have in
Mm-hmm.
order for productivity to be where it needs to be. And I'm wondering, what would you say to those people in the middle who are stressed out about those two achievements at both ends?
Yeah, I middle management is, I think, the hardest job within an organization, right?
The
Because
suckiest job.
you get it from both directions.
Mm-hmm.
You have an employee expectations, guess what, are going to continue to go up and up and up and up. And if you don't
Mm-hmm.
meet those, they can go. Your best people have a billion options now,
Yep.
right? They have more options than they've ever had. So your most
Mm-hmm.
talented people that you count on the most have the most options. And so their expectations are coming at you. Plus you got senior leadership or the board or whoever else dumping downhill on you. And guess what? When things aren't working well, when performance is down, we just roll it down to the lowest level of managers because it's clearly their fault, even though we've never equipped them to really do their job really well. We don't support them. We never check in on their
Ugh.
engagement. And so it's a hard job.
Yeah.
Now, and so I think what we have to do, if I'm, if I'm speaking to the executives, the business owners right now, is like, you need to be, number one, let's just, best thing you can do is clean slate, right? If you've got managers that aren't doing a great job or that you're worried about it, whatever, and you sit in the boardroom and complain about your crappy managers, like, let's just hit reset for a minute, right? Let's punch reset. Let's start over with those managers. Let's go talk to them. Let's go show them some love. Let's go ask them how they're doing for a change, because they get beat up about how their employees are doing. Are you checking in enough with your employees? How are your employees performing? Are they engaged? Whatever. And then we run an engagement survey. And guess what we do with that engagement survey? We beat up on managers. It's the manager's fault that these people aren't engaged. How about we go check in on our managers? Like, how are you doing? And
Yeah.
then What do you need? And then let's start equipping them with a different mindset and some different tools so that then they can show up differently for their people. And so that's why, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I pivoted my entire business a couple years ago because I finally realized that if we're going to fix this experience of work for employees, the highest impact way to do that is to get those frontline and middle managers a different toolkit, get them a different way, help them understand that there is a different way. Like you've been in like all the managers above you that you've had most of your life probably sucked and probably didn't treat you very well. And you've never gotten any other alternative. And so guess what happens? Bad managers breed bad managers. And even when I
Yeah.
was one of them. I was one of them. I mean, when that's the only thing you've ever seen, that's what you do. And so we need to give them a different way of understanding that at a very basic level, what I try to do is help them think completely differently about their role. I try to release them from the contract. And
Mm,
the
beautiful.
idea I teach is something called a cultivation mindset. And the cultivation mindset is this, and it comes from the fact that I grew up on a farm in Northwest Iowa, and I grew up watching farmers. And this didn't hit me until like 20 years after this experience. But when I was young, I got put to work right away. And I got to do exotic jobs like walking beans and picking up rocks and all these things that farmers did at the time. They had to get like neighbor kids to do it because the technology hadn't gotten there to be able to do it without us. But we'd go out and do all this stuff and all these things that farmers do like that. We're dealing with weeds, dealing with rocks,
Oh,
dealing
yeah.
with not
Yeah.
enough water, too much water,
Yeah.
bugs,
Yeah.
all this stuff. They call it cultivation, right?
Yeah.
And farmers are in the performance business, right? Their livelihood and
Mm-hmm.
life
That's right.
depends on taking this little seed that they know has the genetic programming to be the very best version of itself if they can put it in the right environment, that they can get it to meet its basic needs that it needs to grow and keep obstacles out of the way. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that sounds like a pretty beautiful way to foster growth and performance. And it works with humans too. The cultivation mindset says that human being, that unique, beautiful, flawed human being that you just hired, has everything they need to perform at their best. It's all inside of them. Humans are wired for growth and performance. I mean, if you've ever been around a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, you watch babies and how we learn to walk and talk and interact socially just by being around people. We just learn and we perform. We have it all. It's there. And people get out of bed. I also think default setting, people get out of bed in the morning I don't think I've ever met a person in my life who wakes up in the morning and says, boy, I really hope I fail miserably today. I hope I let everybody around me down. I really am
Yeah.
going to suck today at work. Like I'm really going to let my manager down. People want to succeed. Given the opportunity,
That's
they
right.
want to succeed.
You
And
got that
so if
right.
they're not succeeding, what does that mean? That means they have an unmet need, there's an obstacle in their way, or they're in the wrong environment. And guess whose responsibility that
Mm,
is? That's the manager. And
yep.
so, as a manager, my job is to be in service of my people, like the farmer is in service to his crops. The farmer doesn't worry about motivating those seeds to grow. He knows those seeds are going to grow and perform if he does his work or she does her work, right? And so the cultivation mindset is get really dialed into your people. Figure out if you put the right people in the right spot, which is a big part of the equation here. But once if you put the right people in the right spot, then just get dialed into what do they need and what's in their way. That's your work. They will do the rest. They will do the rest. You don't need to work all that hard at motivating them if you do those things well.
Hmm. I love this approach that you have, and I love how you have alluded to it being farming, getting the best potential out of the seed. Those things are hard for managers to learn how to do, so they got to learn it for themselves. We have a Facebook user that says, I feel like the managers struggle the most, flex authority using force and fear, and they are very micro minded. Yes, I agree with that. And I
Agreed.
like this. Yes, new toolkits. Yes, that is the thing that we are moving forward to. inside of this great resignation. I think environment, I want to go back to something that you said earlier because it's been rolling in my mind since this conversation. One of them was, what kind of culture do you have if you have workers that are home? And
Mhm.
I realized, oh my God, there's a whole entire there's no culture. And I want to go back into creating that culture, which I think um, is this is important. I agree with this. Hire for culture fit over skill set works for me almost every time. And I agree with that. That's what I hire for. I'm like, your attitude is what I hire for. I can teach anybody how to do a skill set in the office. It is not that big a deal. There's nothing so complex at work that somebody can't be trained to do it. It doesn't, even if it takes them a little longer than somebody else, I would rather have good attitude, good because I come in with a good attitude. I set that tone every single day when I'm up. This is how I run my company. This is how I run my relationships. And I'm not going to allow a middle manager not to have access to me. In fact, I'll go down and have access with them, talk to them, completely be in their sphere because I want that attitude all the way through my workplace.
Mhm.
And I think if I hire for attitude versus skill set, I'll give somebody hungry a chance. They'll work hard, they do whatever they need to do to learn how to do that. But I feel like you can't breed attitude into, and I like managers from inside. I don't like hiring outside managers. If I hire from inside, for me, I feel like I am having someone whose seed has been set to the culture already.
Mm.
Have I hired outside managers before? Yes. Has that worked? No, because they come in with everybody else's corporate garbage that I don't even like here. And then you
Mhm.
have to retrain them. If they have the right attitude, retraining is easy. If they don't have the right attitude, and for me, the other thing is, I think I want to talk about this because you talked about the pressure of the middle manager.
Mhm.
They get it from both ends. And I think those in their ivory tower C suite that don't come out where the people are, you are absolutely creating the pressure this man is talking about today. How important is it for the C suite people, or even if you're not a big company, let's just say you're a, um, any kind of business owner, small business, somewhere between 20 and 100 people working for you.
Mhm.
And you don't come down and talk to your people, you don't mix it with them. What does that do to the culture? And how important is it for leaders, that owners and people to be in the mix with their teams, including their managers?
Well, it's vitally important because because well, and you had kind of two questions in there. I think it's vitally
Mm-hmm.
important, especially in small businesses, because often in smaller businesses, smaller organizations, they haven't done the work to sort of memorialize or document the culture, right? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. But the only way the culture takes life and meaning is by
Mm-hmm.
interacting with that founder, interacting with that executive, having those
Yeah.
conversations, getting coached, observing how they behave and how they treat people and how they show up to things. Like that's how the culture grows. And that's okay. When you're young and you're growing, like you got to do what you got to
Mm-hmm.
do. I would say, however, though, back to your point about, when people are distributed, like how do you define culture? And then we talked about culture fit. Um, Here's the culture fit I'm a fan of, assuming that your culture is defined with great intention. And in
Mm-hmm.
most cases, what culture fit means is I hire people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is that becomes out
A
of
whole
out
bunch
of
of
good.
me.
Yeah, and it's easy to manage. Like I can manage
Yeah.
people like me. I understand them. I know how they're going to behave. I can predict it. But guess what? You lose diversity. You lose a
Mhm.
whole bunch of perspectives. Your team starts to get really lopsided towards a particular style. It becomes even that much harder then to bring diversity in because you have a bunch of groupthink. And so you have to be really careful about that when you're defining your culture. And somebody mentioned this earlier, and they were right on the money. It's about values.
Mm-hmm.
It's about getting really clear about values and defining those and being very specific and doing that. Often do it in partnership with your people, because
Mm-hmm.
when you roll out values, if you're doing a good job of defining culture, when you roll it out, when you finally get to it and you share it with your employees, people go, well, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's not a surprise. There's nothing new. They're like, yeah, no, that's what it is. If you have a healthy culture. Now, if you're trying to transform your culture, that's a different thing. It's like, well, we know that our current culture is a hot mess. It's all over the place. We have microcultures every place. And so we want to get greater consistency. So we're going to go through a process to identify what values will drive our business. What values do our employees really feel are most important? And then we're going to drive a stake in the ground around those things. And then we're
Mm.
going to redesign our business around those things. We're going to redesign how we treat employees, how we communicate, how we develop managers, how we hire people around that. But it has to be everything starts with clarity.
I love
Everything
that.
starts with clarity.
I love that. And that's so often we get clear about our business, but we don't get clear about our culture.
That's right.
Listen, you're on the Coffee Break Show, and we're going to be right back. And we are with Jason, and we will be talking about culture and high productivity. And I'll see you in a second. What if over the next 14 days, Tracy and I would help you create a launch plan to launch your brand new Facebook Live show without you having to think about what type of content to do or where to post it, or where together we would build and help you implement a live show launch strategy, plus give you live coaching. And the best part is, we won't charge you a dime. Would you take us up on that offer? If you would, just type down below this show, "Let me in," and we will message you the free link to join our 14-day live show launch accelerator program. Write "Let me in" right now, and we'll see you on the inside. Thank you for being here. We're back at the Coffee Break Show today. We are with Jason Lauritsen. Whoo, boy,
It's a
tongue twister
mouthful.
there.
It's a
It
mouthful.
is. It really is. But we're back here, and we're talking about the new workplaces. We are talking about how to create and explore how to unlock productivity, create relationships and connections with employees, with C-suite, with people in general, so that we can work better together and have the higher productivity and results. And we have been talking about getting the workplace to the point where we are communicating differently and creating based on values and clarity. And I want to pop over to here because I think somebody is very engaged in this conversation. To evaluate performance, does it depend if you have any action focus versus outcome focus accountability structure? Do you prefer one over the other? Thank you for that question.
Hmm.
So I'm going to leave that for you. Does it depend on having action focus or outcome focus?
So performance is, in most cases, performance is outcomes, right? I mean, everything
Mm-hmm.
starts with outcomes. Performance is the lifeblood of the organization. It's the reason the organization exists. It's the reason we have jobs. And so outcomes is where it has to start. And so I think when you're planning performance, you start with outcomes. What is it that we need to accomplish? What kind of value do we need to create through your role? That's a really important level of clarity to create. The second level, then, though, is important. I think action focus I'm taking as the outcome is what, the action is how. And I also believe that it's really important, and I think high performing teams do get clarity on both of those things. So they define very clearly the what part of your performance. Here are the outcomes. And then they also have very clear behavioral expectations. And Vickie, you were defining some of those earlier. You were talking about on your team, we have these mantras, and those mantras are behavioral expectations. They're
Mm-hmm.
ways that we go about doing what we do. So, I've used all sorts of behavioral expectations with teams in the past. Things like um, no excuses. Things like ask, don't assume. Things like forgive quickly, apologize and move on. And there's, things like this. And those are simple, like broad, but you can also talk about, you can define behavioral expectations at how do we interact with customers? How do we interact with each other? But I think it's important. Both of those are important, but you have to prioritize outcomes, because without the outcomes being achieved, how many, Vickie, I guarantee you've had people like this. They're the hardest people in the world to deal with, is people that, great people, you love them, they work the right way, they do everything you ask them to do, and they just can't deliver. Like
Yeah. Oh
hardest
God. Yeah. That
situation.
is the hardest.
Because you're like, I love you, but
I
this
gotta
isn't
let you
working.
go.
This isn't
Mm-hmm.
working,
Yeah.
and so action can't be the first. That can't be what we prioritize. We have to prioritize outcomes first, but then we should be coaching on the behavior and the how and the action as a
Love that.
path towards the outcomes.
Thank you for that question, by the way, because I think
Great
this
one.
is so important. It was really a great question. One, and I want to dig a little bit deeper, because I want to know, um, I want to talk to the business owners right now, and I want to talk to them, and maybe they're experiencing some of the heavy parts of having this great resignation. And I want to ask another quick question. Haven't you written a couple of books on this topic? Is that
I,
true?
it is true. It is true. Two different topics, actually, but very interrelated. The first one is called Social Gravity, Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. That one
Mm.
wrote about 9 years ago. It's hard to believe. Time flies, right?
Could you
Um,
find these, Robin, and flop them up there in the feed? And if you're driving, just relax. We have
we
you.
got you.
They're in the notes. They're in the notes in the feed and below this. Yeah.
So
So
social gravity is more of a how-to for you on a personal level, how to build your network, how to fuel your success and happiness through the relationships you create in your life.
mm-hmm.
My most recent book is called Unlocking High Performance, and most of that's a book that's kind of it's a blueprint for how to build a more human organization that more naturally unlocks the potential
Beautiful.
in all of your people. And so that is where you can find that one, Unlocking High Performance.
Okay, so social gravity is in there. Can we get the high performance one in there as well? Because I think these two topics are super important. If you have lost some of your major players, and to me, I agree with you. There is something that I know just like the back of my hand, and that is that top performers, people who are naturally high performance people, they know they're high performance, and they do not want to work at places that are not high performance. But I mean emotional high performance, and challenge high performance, and that commitment, that relationship. They will go, they know they'll be picked up by any company. So it's like, you want the best people, then you have to be the best people. Thank you for putting the links. Both the links are in there for Amazon, for Unlocking High Performance Management, as well as Social Gravity. You can get those both there. They look weird on the link line, but the Amazon link in the thread is that just push the button, it'll take you there to get those books, because I think this is one of the biggest transformations in the world that is happening, the whole world that's happening right now, is how we treat each other in the workplace, how we fundamentally function in the workplace together as a team. And I want to go back to measuring success in maybe remote working. And as a manager or an owner, how is it that we can be relating with? Because to me, there's so much distance now between working all in the office place, and now you're working from home and I'm working from my home. How is it that we can create that relationship that we want to have, that we would have in a normal workplace, in this work from home environment?
Well, I mean, one of the first things that I tend to challenge when I'm talking with leaders or managers or coaching a
Mm-hmm.
group of managers is to push back on this notion that, boy, how are we ever going to build relationships now that we're all, working from home? Because
Mm-hmm.
here is what I believe to be true, and I think the data really backs this up, is that when we were in the office, we had a false sense of security, a false
Mm-hmm.
sense of, oh, we're doing a great job. I can see those people. And I
Mm-hmm.
said hi to them at one point this week. So I feel like I'm doing a good job of maintaining a relationship with them. They saw me walk to the coffee machine a couple
Yeah.
of times. And I think what has happened is that all of the false signals that were telling us that we were doing a good job of managing and leading are no longer there, right? So now we don't have that, so we feel naked, and we feel like, well, like, I don't know what I don't how do I
How do I do this?
how do I build relationships with people? It's like the same way you always built relationships with people. You make time for them, you ask them questions, you listen, right? You bring teams together, you create conversation. The reason you're having trouble at doing it now, and Vickie, I'm not talking about you specifically,
Yeah.
I'm saying
Yeah.
you, the royal you, is because you always sucked at it. It's
Mm.
now time to up your game. It's not harder now. It's the same it's always been. We're just using different tools, and you have to be more intentional about it. Like, you can build relationships through video. You can build relationships in a lot of
Agreed.
different ways.
Agreed.
I mean, there's marriages and relationships that can work
Long
from a
distance in
distance all the
different
time.
countries.
How in the
Yeah.
world do they do it? Well, they use the tools, and they still talk, and they tell each other they love each other, and once in a while they get together in person, right? And it's not as complicated. I think we have to break this narrative that, like, oh, remote work is impossible. How can we do this? How do we build? Same thing with culture. This whole conversation about culture. How do we build culture in a remote distributed workplace? The same way you always did it. You
He
got to
just
get
has to get good at it.
you got to get clear about what your culture is first,
Yeah,
because you're
I
not
like
building
this.
anything.
I like this conversation so much. Harder to hide when there's only you and another person on the screen. That's really
That's
true.
true.
You know what's interesting too, because I was thinking about my business right now. I have two business partners. I have one business partner who is in Australia.
Mhm.
We're in completely different time zones and
Yeah.
everything else, and we still make this incredibly tight, incredible relationship. And then I have another business partner who's on the East Coast while I'm, here in Colorado. And both of those relationships are just absolutely built in cement, even though we have not seen each other in person for a couple of years now. Everything has been through this tool right here.
Yep.
So the key thing is getting good at building these kinds of relationships. 3 tips, please. Getting good at building these kinds of relationships. I don't care if it's remote or you're in the office. Either way, he named the thing that wasn't there. You sucked at it before. You're going to suck at it now. It's a skill set you have to learn. And that is I love the way you said that. It's just that simple. So tell us some tips for that.
So, I mean, number one, and maybe I'll do four because this is cheating, because I
Great.
already said this. Number one, you have to make time.
Yep. You got to
Make
make time
time on a regular basis with your people. So
to
that's
connect.
weekly check-ins, monthly one-on-one meetings, right? That's what you're doing. So you have to make time. Number two is ask questions. Ask questions,
Mhm.
because what happens too often, and this is what managers, right? The cycle of bad management continues. You've been around managers for most of your life, and leaders who think the way they add value is to talk at you,
That's true. That is oh God,
right?
I'm already disturbed.
Right. And so
Yeah.
what we have to do is interrupt that. I mean, like, think about that again. Relationship test. If you had a friend who
Mhm.
every time you went to coffee with them, they just sat down and talked at you for 45 minutes and then got up and left, how long would you be friends with that person? You're like, what a bore. What a bore. I'm not doing that anymore. So
Yeah.
so in to way the way you break that cycle, ask questions. And so it can start with, so here's the money question, just from a to open things up, is, well, two things. I'll give you one. If you're having a like regular one-on-one meeting, the way I opened every one-on-one meeting, and I've coached this ever since, is, what's the most important thing we need to talk about today? Because that way the employee has the invitation to take it
I
wherever they want to
love
take it.
that.
And
I
they might
love
say,
that.
well, my husband served me divorce papers last night.
Oof.
And guess what? All the other stuff you wanted to talk about is out the window. Guess what we're
Mhm.
talking about today? We're talking about,
Yep.
oh man, that sucks. Like,
I
how's that?
love
You're like,
that.
and then that's the conversation you have because that's what they need in that moment. Or it's not always going to be like that. So I
Yeah.
mean, that's a dramatic example, but that happens once in a while, you know?
Mhm.
Another question is like, hey, tell me what have you been doing for fun lately? Like, I think I do that. And I mean, that's a dangerous one because some people will be like, huh, for fun. I didn't know we were supposed to do that. And it's like, well, maybe we should talk about that. Like, what? Maybe you need more fun, man. We're going to burn you out if you don't have more fun. So ask questions. I learned this in the rule of thumb I would offer to you. I learned back in the sales days, right? Because this is a persuasive, like you want to leave this conversation with them feeling great about the interaction. What I learned when I was in sales is the person that talks the least wins the interaction. And I mean,
That's true.
in this case, win is leaving the other person feeling great. And so
Mhm.
if you have a one-on-one or you check in with your employee, if they talk for 14 minutes and then you talk for one, and that was like saying, hey, it's good to see you, and you ask one question, they talk for 14 minutes and it's over, guess what? They're going to leave that conversation saying, that was the
That's
best
right.
conversation I've ever had with my
So
manager.
true.
And so ask questions. You need to get to know your people. Get to know who they are as human beings outside of the office. What is important to them? What do they care about? And then make notes so that you can then every time it's like, how is your son's soccer doing? Or how is, and don't rely on your memory. I sucked at that. Like I had to ask questions and make notes. And then before every meeting, I look at my notes and be like, oh, well, they're into, you know, some kind of role-playing games, you know, magic role-playing games. So I'm going to ask them about that. I mean, it's the same way that I foster a relationship with my kids. Be interested in
Mhm.
what they're interested in, right? Then they'll come to trust you. And I think the last relationship building, the last tip that I would give you is just be in service, right? Think of it in the way that you would be, you know, your best friend or whatever. Like if they listen when you're talking to them, listen intently for something that if they're struggling with something or they have a challenge or there's something that
Yeah.
comes up, be in service to them, be compassionate, listen for those things, and then offer to help and do something. So that those
Love
are
that.
pretty simple things that and guess what? This works
Easy to
in
do.
it works in your personal life too, not just at work.
It certainly does. Oh gosh, Jason, this has been a fun conversation to have today. How can they connect with you if they want to work with you or if they want you to work with their people? How can they be involved with you?
Well, if there's a lot of different ways you can if you can spell my name, my last name, you can find me 1,000 different ways through the Googles. My website is jasonlauritsen.com if you want to stalk me a little bit before you reach out.
Will you put
It,
that up, Robin?
if you want to and actually on my website there's a calendly link. You can go out and book 30 minutes to get acquainted and
Nice.
talk if you'd like. You can hit me up at jason@jasonlauritsen.com, or we can, you know, if you want a little less commitment, connect up with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm all over the
Brilliant.
place there. You can learn kind of what I'm up to and decide if you want to reach out.
Brilliant. I want to say this was some of the most important conversation we had today, Jason, because this is the biggest transition I think the world is having. The new way of connecting, working, and being together. This is one of the most important changes that is happening. And I think it is having us deepen our relationships, up level our emotional intelligence, create environments where there's a little more connection, relationship, and love. And this is going to be going on, I think, for more than just a few months. I think it's going to be a permanent change that we are learning. And I want to thank you for sharing everything you shared today, because it is one of the most important things we are going through. It's not just the pandemic, it's the way we're relating with each other. all across the board in any type of situation, especially when we're working together. And I don't mean just at your job, I mean in every facet of it. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for bringing your brand of incredibleness to the show. All right, you guys, next Wednesday, we have another fabulous guest. I will see you next Wednesday. This has been the Coffee Break Show. Peace out. Mwah!